Hi, I'm Scott Carola, Assistant Deputy Chief of the Patrol Operations for New Bedford Police and also the PIO. Very, very fortunate today to be able to interview people who really have a great understanding of the history of our department and the history of a lot of different things within our community and within our society. I have Sergeant Rita Ribeiro and I have Officer Sandy Grace. One of the things that really makes me feel proud to be a New Bedford police officer is the fact that we have such a rich history that goes back, a couple of hundred years. Not all of that history is a proud history, but a lot of it is. And I feel very, very fortunate and very privileged to be able to sit here today and speak to people who were pioneers in our city and in our industry. And I cannot imagine that it was at all easy to be one of the first generation of women police officers here in New Bedford. So I'm really looking to get your input, and your memories are so valuable that we'd like to take this time to talk to you and go through that. So I think maybe who was hired first now? Sandy, that was you, right? Tell us a little bit about, first of all, the climate in the city in the 70s, which I know were probably pretty tumultuous, and what led you to this job?
A friend of mine had the job, and I was interested in what she was doing and decided to follow in her footsteps. The climate in the city was not bad by 1977. The riots had come and gone, and we were just moving on. And myself and Officer Barbara Lipset were the first two females in the academy to work patrol once we graduated. So we started January 2nd, 1977. And on that date, former Chief Joseph Pelletier put out an order that there would no longer be a difference between male and female officers, that everybody was a police officer.
What were the differences before that?
The department had what they called the women's division, and they wore different shirts, and they wore little skirts, and they wore funny little hats.
Hats as well?
Yeah. But as of that day, we all, male, female, wore the same thing unless you were in plain clothes. So Barbara and I started the academy.
So they weren't out there arresting people or things like that. What were the responsibilities of the former? What was
the women's division, they worked juvenile. They acted as matrons. There was a female in the narcotic division, but that Monday morning, Barbara and I started the academy with 22 guys from different areas.
That was just for our city. It wasn't regional like we do now.
It was run by Chief Richard Benoit, and in our city on the third floor of 25 Spring Street.
Oh, they ran the academy out of headquarters.
And there were 22 guys, so we felt a little intimidated initially, but the academy was okay.
How long was it then?
2 months. It was from January to March.
Right.
12 weeks. 12 weeks. Yeah, we graduated in March. And we did everything that was asked of us, sometimes a little slower. We had problems with firearms, but former Chief Ronnie Teachman took Barbara and I to the inside range at Station 3 and decided we needed a little assistance. So he worked with us and we passed. When we went back to the range on Monday morning, we passed.
Very good. How did your family feel about you going into this line of work?
They didn't say too much. I come from a large family. I had a cousin that was a state trooper. I had a 6-year-old daughter. So it was different.
Yeah.
It was different for her, definitely. But my first assignment was Station 3 Uniform Patrol, and that was different. That was very different.
And by that time, that was Station 3 up on Ashley Boulevard. That was up and running.
Boulevard in Technical.
Was it still a relatively new station, or?
Relatively. I was assigned to the 4 to midnight shift, as was Barbara. She was assigned to 4 to midnight at headquarters. And for the most part, the guys were receptive. There were a couple that, gave you the look, like, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
There was one in particular that I'll never forget. Captain Michael Holodinsky. He was a patrolman at the time. And my first night, I rode with him, and he gave me a pep talk.
Really?
He was very, very good. And he told me, don't let them.
Now you refer to him as captain. He wasn't a captain back
No,
then.
he was
an
a
officer.
patrol officer.
Yeah.
He said, they're going to try to get under your skin. Don't let them. He said, you've got 2 strikes. And I'm like, two strikes? He said, you're a female and you're a minority.
Right.
And somebody's going to push that issue. Turned out they didn't really. I had an incident where I went to a call and the complainant looked at me and walked around the cruiser to talk to my male partner, and he sent her back.
Wow.
He said, she's a police officer, talk to her. So all in all, it really wasn't so bad.
Now, coming out of the riots, obviously, and the tension that was there at the time, first of all, what was the makeup of the department? Do you remember? Like, was it mostly white men?
Majority. And even in
Majority.
77, I can remember at Station 3, the night shifts, there were 2 minorities on one platoon and 1 on the other, and then me. So
Really?
there were 4 of us there. That was it.
Out of being a woman and being a minority as well, what do you think was probably you felt the greatest resistance toward?
Both.
Both. Yeah.
Both, yeah.
Yeah.
Both in the station and on the street.
Right.
Yeah. But I didn't let it get the best of me.
Mm-hmm.
My attitude was they're not paying my rent and they're not feeding my kid. So.
That's right.
Rita,
what was your experience? You came in.
I came on a year later.
A year
later.
A year later in 1978.
Now, did you know Sandy before?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I grew
Okay.
up. Sandy,
Did you talk her into this life
No.
or what?
No.
Okay.
I had no intentions of ever being a police officer.
Okay.
Nobody in my family was a police officer. And it's ironic. I happened to be working for the city with youth at the time.
Okay.
And I'd be in court with troubled youth. And I would go to court and say, there's nobody that was representing them or that looked like us for these kids. And that kind of bothered me. And then a woman, Ruby Doughton, who people all know in the city, Ruby Doughton, came up to me and said, listen, they're having tests for police officers. Why don't you take the test and see if you can become a police officer? And ironically, my husband always thought about it and never did it. And I went home and I said, I'm going to take the exam. He goes, go for it.
Yeah.
And I did, and obviously I became a police officer. We all had similar experiences. My experience was I lived in the North End, and I didn't want to work in the North End because I lived there. So I was very familiar with the South End. I actually grew up in the South End, and all the police officers in the South End were more minorities. So there was one relief in the South End that had the most minority men, who I was familiar with. Sonny Almeida was one.
Sure.
Fergie was another one. They all worked, Joe Lopes, they all worked in that station. I go, that's where I want to be because I want to feel comfortable. And I did go there, and I was on a relief. I was the only woman. And I laugh now when I think back of it in hindsight because there was one bathroom and one shower and one locker room. And that was it. They never had a woman there, and they didn't know what to expect. You know, I didn't know what to expect. I would go to work, and I'd have to go in my uniform because obviously I didn't have a place to change. I could change, but it would be in front of my whole relief, which isn't appropriate. Or I can just go to work like that. They would get out of work, and you know, it was. I was tested every day. I would go in, talk about sexual harassment. That wasn't, the term wasn't there, but I'd go in and they'd literally be changing their clothes in front of me and thinking I was going to get upset, and I'd sit there and I'd go, gee, it's just like being home with my husband. And I'd go about my business and I'd do my thing. They, also, I had a boss at the time who didn't think women belonged there. The captain of my station at the time didn't think women belonged there.
What makes you think that? Was he outright verbal about it?
Well, what he did was I was the only female. I was brand new, and I had this beat. Actually, right where we're sitting right now, was my beat.
Unit 23.
I was Route 1 and 2.
Oh,
it was a
yeah.
walking
Now
beat.
routes were walking beats,
Walking
but you
beats.
also had cars at the
We
time?
had cars.
We had gold
cars.
Plymouths.
Right, we had cars.
We had what?
Gold Plymouths.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Now, how'd you differentiate at the time? Let's cut you up. How'd you differentiate at the time who got a car and who walked?
The boss did that.
Whoever the boss was. And
Oh, the bosses got the
Rita
cars.
Rita had the beat. Now, mind you, I came in November, which is freezing cold winter time.
Yeah.
And down here, there was nothing except the beach. There was no stores or anything. I'd leave the station on Cove Street, walk in by myself with my walkie-talkie, and I'd have to walk the whole perimeter of this thing. And luckily, I had a couple of police officers. One day I was freezing. I was poor at really, I was married. I lived in just had moved to the North End. I had 2 little kids. And this police officer that I knew came along in his car and saw me walking. He got out and he gave me one glove. He had big hands. So I took one of his gloves, put both hands, and that's how I walked the beat.
Oh, my.
And if the captain told them,
Don't pick you up.
if you got picked up and I catch you picking her up, I'm going to write you up.
Really?
Because they thought that I was not going to do it and I was going to quit and go home
So
and
you think
cry.
that he was trying to force
for
you out
sure.
the door?
There was no doubt about it. No doubt about it. And you know what? There was a fire station, and the guys could walk around and go in the fire station at night and go get coffee and hang out in the fire station. I wasn't allowed to go in the fire station. But I can say the guys that I worked with, except for one, pretty much took care of me. And when I say, made sure I had a glove for my hand.
Yeah.
If they knew the captain wasn't there or the captain was off, they would pick me up and take me for a little ride. Don't say nothing. Drop me off at the corner down there. So I would try, that would happen. But I was tested.
Sure.
And then the other problem is when I had one, I would try to go to the bathroom, for instance, and like I said, one bathroom, no locks on the doors, and they would know that I'm going to the bathroom and some jerk would, excuse my language, but another fellow officer would open the door on purpose because they knew that, they were trying to harass me. And so I went to the captain. He wasn't a captain, it was Lieutenant Eugenio at the time. He was my first boss. I loved the man.
He was an instructor in the academy.
He was an instructor in the academy. He was an instructor. He was my boss when I was down there. He was probably the best boss I had at the time and took care of me. I had police officers' wives go into the station and tell them, I don't want my husband in a car with her.
Wow.
Oh, that happened constantly.
Yeah.
I had a
That happened
wife.
to me, too.
I had a
Really?
wife that had 2 kids, and I was on the night shift and would follow the cruiser around with a scanner. And wherever we went, she would follow us. Finally, I went and I said, I can't take this anymore. So the captain the lieutenant called everybody in, and he called the wife in, and he said to her, she's a police officer like everybody else. If you don't like it, your husband can go somewhere else. Exactly.
Back in the 70s, they had an organization called the Policemen's Wives Association.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, remember
Really?
them?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
What
I
was
would-
their function?
Oh,
keep the police officer women away from the islands.
I don't know. But I was approached by one. At some point, Barbara and I were on, and then you started. Then Cindy Rose now started. So there were several females at that point by 1980. No, by 79, say.
79.
And they couldn't keep us all on the 4 o'clock shift. So we had to start like the men, rotating shifts. We worked 4 to 12 one week and 12 to 8 a.m. the following week.
That's how we worked. when
Yeah.
we
And
first came
we
on.
Never an 8 to 4?
No.
That was always for the
it's 8
senior
to 4
people.
You had a
was
big
mostly senior people.
People.
So I don't know where I was parked, and a female came up to me and said, the Police Officers' Wives Association is upset. I said, what happened? You women are working midnights. We don't want you in cars with our husband.
Oh, wow.
I was
Yeah.
like, oh, well.
But you're saying that in the South End Station, Chief Pelletier at the time
Yeah.
ordered my captain that no woman could be in a car with a male after midnight.
Oh, that never happened at Station
That-
3.
No,
Really?
And at Station 3, we had our own locker room.
No.
But,
Fortunately.
Yeah.
you know, I just told her, hey, look, I have a job to do. That's
Sure.
it.
We
It's funny when you tell the story. It's
stories, but
it's not. You know, it's not 100 years ago. This
No,
is within the
40
last.
years ago.
Yeah, it's
45 years
within
ago.
my lifespan. You know that these.
Well-
so really, it's.
The other thing is when we came on, all of us, if you notice, all the women that came on, with the exception, the majority of women that came on were all of color.
Right.
So we were twofers. That's a twofer.
Twofers.
You know what a twofer is?
Yeah, I
You were
understand.
a male. You were a minority.
and a female.
Yeah.
And a female.
Well, that's what Michael
So they
told me.
hired
Yeah.
they hired all black women, majority of black women, to make it so that they would fill the quota for sex. So
At some point, I left Uniform Patrol. The chief called me in and asked me to take narcotics, and I did. That was 1980. And shortly after that, they started hiring more females, so that by 87, I was out of narcotics, working here in the South End, midnight to 8. By then, we were on steady shifts, and you could bid on the shift that you wanted. And my shift had 4 females. Of course, we drove the lieutenant crazy, but we were there.
most
And
I ever worked with was one.
really, no, we had 4, and everything. She's right about the locker room. By 1990, that locker room was still a one-er.
Wow.
We saw many men changing in or out of their uniform, but
my.
big
Listen,
deal.
can tell you, if it was Valentine's Day, I had put. Oh, I can tell you
Oh
stories.
yeah,
They'd wear hearts on their drawers, and oh
My
god,
goodness.
I had the one with the. I had an old purple Gremlin car that just about
Right.
could make it to the police
I
station.
remember that.
And I would bring this is how crazy some of these guys were. And I get in my car and it stunk fish. And I'm like, why is my car stinking? And I go home. My husband had a job that he was away. And I couldn't find anything. There was nothing in my car. I go to work the next morning, it's summertime. My car's got flies on the hood and it stinks. So I go in and I tell my good officer that was very good friends of mine, John Cooper, at the time. And I said, John, can you check my car? It's stinking. And it smells fish. And he goes, I can't find any. He opens up the hood. And one of those crazy guys I worked with took a big fish and laid it on my carburetor and closed the hood. So I had fried fish for riding
Now,
around for
is that
days.
something that the male officers would do to other male officers as well, or
No,
it felt like it wasn't
no,
just to be
no.
good humor; it was targeting
It was-
you. Yeah.
But I can't. I was going
For the
to.
most part, most of them were okay.
Yeah.
She mentioned sexual harassment, and yeah, there was an air of sexual harassment.
Yeah.
But I found if you just ignored them, they went off and bugged somebody else. I did have a sergeant that every time he talked to me, he had to touch me.
We won't talk. We won't go there.
So finally, one day after roll call, he says, "Grace, come here," and he starts talking. And I went, "Is there a problem with your mouth?" Of course, all the guys stopped and looked. "No, what?" I said, "Well, every time you want to talk to me, you have to touch me, and I wish you'd stop." And that ended it.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the kind of stuff.
Well, it was a new experience for men to be working with women in this environment,
Especially
but
in,
also
in the North End, which was the city itself. The North End part of the city was primarily white.
Right. It was completely.
And like I said,
the
there
North
were-
End
it was
specifically.
segregated very
and there
much
were,
so.
I think the only place that had minorities was what's now Duncan Daunton, Satellite.
Right.
Satellite
It
Village.
was projects, but
But,
other than that,
The guys were, most of them were okay. You know, they let me know not to
Yeah.
go to Satellite Village alone, or no, Evergreen Park. If you get a call to Evergreen Park, wait for a backup. Most of them were good. They really were. There was one who's Dick Spurlett. You remember him?
sure, yeah, son's still on the job.
Yeah, he was a canine officer at the time, and he backed me up on several calls, and he always got there first, and I was like, how'd you get here so fast? I didn't know the streets. I grew up in the South End and South Central, and the only thing I knew about the North End was that Acushnet Avenue went all the way up, and Ashley Boulevard went all the way up. That was it.
Yeah.
So he said, Sandy, in between calls, you need to ride up the avenue and down the boulevard and learn these side streets. And that was a good bit of
Yeah.
advice.
No, it's funny you mentioned Dick Spurlett because I think the first time that you and I met It was my first time on the. It was my first year on the job, and I got into a cruiser
You
accident.
cracked the cruiser up.
I cracked the cruiser up, and I remember you showed up at the hospital.
Yeah.
Because
and
I had cracked up my melon as
you
well.
were-
I was a nervous wreck. Yeah.
Well,
And then
I'll tell you, you're lucky that it was Dick Spurlett working that day.
it was Dick Spurlett, and he came there, and I said, "Here it goes. I'm gonna," and
You were
he.
almost in tears, you poor thing.
Yeah, he took me for a ride home. I remember he bought me a hot chocolate, and he said, "Listen, you gotta," he read me the riot act in a nice way. And you were there also, maybe in union capacity. You were there.
I think I was going in on the detail office.
Oh, maybe that's what it was. Yeah.
But it was Wells Street, wasn't it? The exit off.
It was
of
a Purchase Street on
Purchase
ramp.
Street.
Yeah, I took it too fast.
Yeah.
I was not used to driving
you
fast
took
when I
the
was young.
guardrail.
So yeah, but so it's a new experience for the officers to work with women, but
yeah.
also the public as well.
yeah.
So speak a little bit about that. Like how did the public react to? And you've already told me the one story about
Yeah.
the woman
Well,
coming to see a man.
They were always astonished to see a female, for the most part, don't you think?
Yeah, but I
At
had,
North End they were. And then one particular call that I remember, John Silver and I were, we were in separate cars.
Just Long John.
Long John.
Long John Silver.
And we got
Because
sent
his
to,
father was a cop as well. I think,
yeah,
right? Okay.
we got sent to a barroom fight.
What bar do you know?
It was on Acushnet Avenue. I think it's where Top Shelf is now,
Okay.
but it was another name.
Bullpen, maybe.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
it used to be the
I don't
Bullpen.
remember. But we went in, and the place was busted up. The lights were broken, chairs were
Yeah.
overturned, and there was a man well over 6 feet tall that was still busting the joint up. So we got to him, and he looked at me and he said, "I never kissed a lady cop." I said, "You haven't?" "No, I never kissed a lady cop." John Silver's giving me the elbow. "Let him kiss you." Let him kiss you. John's just as tall as me. I mean,
Yeah, John
we're
was a small
both
guy.
probably.
Yeah.
I said, "Okay, buddy," on the cheek. Yeah, I let him kiss me.
Wow, he was.
I wasn't going to get beat up.
It's so funny she
Did
said
he get
that.
arrested? Did he get arrested after
He
that?
certainly
So he
did.
did, I'm
And,
sure he
and,
did.
and he was calm after that, and we
Yeah.
handcuffed him and took him to the station.
It's funny she said that when my first car that they gave me
Yeah.
was Unit 23, which was the same area
Peninsula,
that I
yeah.
had as the beat.
Yeah.
So I
We're
but
sitting in
this-
it.
But this area had the most bars in the city at the time.
Oh, no,
Rock
not that.
Avenue.
Well, I'm saying for down
Oh.
there. It was loaded with
Yeah.
bars. 23, I should say,
Yeah.
south out of
Yeah.
the south end, had the most bars.
Yeah.
And it was kind of rough at the time. And I'll never forget, we had Billy Woods Wharf, we had the one on Cove Street,
Yeah.
whatever that side, Annie's is now or whatever. Anyhow, same
Davies
thing.
Locker. There used to be.
Davies
Yeah,
Locker
There was
Davies
a
Locker,
Smuggler's Den. I think it was.
Smuggler's Den. Well, anyway, the same thing happened down here, and I get there, and the guy's like frailing and going crazy, giving everybody a hard time in the bar, and the guys are trying to hold him down, and I walk in, he goes,
Yeah.
"Take me." I'm like, well, I never had a woman take me. Like,
Amazing,
let's give
yeah.
it, and,
Yeah.
and he just came.
So it's a
to me
different
without-
dynamic
it
because
was so
sometimes when
quick.
men are, even police officers, when men are confronting each other, it's kind of like that thing, and then a woman comes in, it's different.
I think
maybe.
the females were
The only
didn't
time I
accept
ever.
us as that well. I mean, I got beamed with toilet paper. I got
The
beamed
only
with
time I
eggs.
got hurt really bad was from a female.
Me too.
Really?
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
I was open, same place, a bar over here on Cove Street. The woman was under arrest. The guys were putting her in a car, and they put her in my car in the back seat. They put her in. She had these long spike heels, and she kicked the window right out of the cruiser.
Right.
So I had to open the door. As I'm opening the door to put her back in, she kicked me right in my chest. I mean, I was hurting. I had to go to the hospital and everything. I got with her heel right in
Before
my.
this pre vests, there's no vest.
Oh,
we didn't have
then.
vests.
We had no vest back
No vest
then.
back then.
What
What
was
year,
a vest?
what year did that start to come in?
In the 90s, I think.
I think
90s, early
narcotics
90s.
had 'em.
You had them before.
Yeah.
The narcotics had them before
I see,
the
yeah.
patrol, but
Yeah.
we didn't have them.
It seems like equipment starts to
Patrol
trickle out
didn't
to
have
people.
them.
Yeah.
No.
But like she says, females, I can recall a domestic here in the South End. Sylvester Santos and I go, knock, knock, knock. And somebody inside says, "Who is it?" And Sylvester's yelling, "Police." And they want to know if our mother knows we're out this late. You know, it's well after midnight. But anyway, we get in, and the guy's going to jail. He beat the bananas out of his wife, girlfriend. And while Sylvester's cuffing him and I'm facing him, all of a sudden Sylvester's eyes open wide. And I was like, what happened? the female complainant came up behind me and clocked me with a telephone, split my head open. So when you hear that domestic violence calls are the most serious, it's right.
Yeah, there's a lot of unpredictable emotions going on.
Yeah. And off to St. Luke's, stitches in my head.
Yeah. Do you feel that you connected with female victims in a different way than maybe the men would have connected with them?
I think so.
Yeah.
Most definitely. In fact, talking about domestics, it was really difficult for me. I ran the domestic violence unit, the first one we had in the department, and that probably was one of the most difficult jobs I had throughout my whole career. I would go home at night and not know if somebody was going to die under my watch, because it was horrible. And people would say to me, "How can you do that?" They're going to
because the laws weren't designed at that point to protect as well as they do now, probably.
They were, but we would get. They were there because restraining orders had just come out, and the reason
80s?
why we even had a domestic violence unit, it was 90s, early 93 actually is when it started. And the reason we had it is because our woman mayor, Rosemary Tierney, her husband was a judge who had to wake up in the middle of the night and do restraining orders all night. And then she said, "What the heck's going on here? My husband's up all night doing these restraining orders." And that's how literally the department got a domestic violence unit.
So we got through the uniform patrol scene. She went to domestic violence, I was in narcotics, and then somewhere along the line we met up with the school resource officer program. And that was an eye-opener.
Yeah.
It definitely was.
I was fortunate to have, I say, 12 of the best officers in the city.
When did that begin, the school resource officer?
1999.
99.
Is that was it post-Columbine? Is that what you think?
Yes, right after Columbine.
That's when it started to...
I don't think anybody that doesn't have children in school or doesn't go to school to see what's going on knows that those teachers are worked to death.
I used to say, "Oh, I should have been a police officer. I mean, a teacher. Look, they get summers off, they get this and that."
No.
And then when we actually were there, and my office was actually in the Gomes School down the South End.
Yeah.
And we got to see a day-to-day what these teachers put up with.
They put up with a lot.
And I used to say, we wear guns and everything. They wear nothing. They got parents coming in screaming at them. It was trying, but I just want to mention this because I think this is important for the conversation. When the school resources office unit started, it was the first time ever in the history of the department that we were able to choose, police officers actually had to interview for a position. And I told them I wouldn't take it, and Teachman was really good, Captain Teachman at the time was very good about it, because I said, I'm not doing something if I don't have the officers, because when you're working with kids, you really have to have the right person. And I had probably the most diverse unit going.
It was a senior unit.
Right, but it was an extremely diverse unit. We had older men, we had younger men, we covered the whole gamut, you know, and I remember one particular officer, the chief called me in because he said, "I'll give you free reign, but if there's somebody I think don't belong there, I'm going to tell you about it." He calls me in, he says, "This particular officer never comes to work. I don't know why you're going to take him. He's a sick day abuser." And I said, "Sometimes people don't like what they're doing, and that's why they're an abuser." I said, "I want him, and if he proves to be a sick day abuser, he'll be out. But I think I want to give him a chance. He loves kids." And he came on. That guy worked for me for 3 years without taking a sick day, for 3 years. So it just goes to show. Sandy worked at Connie,
I worked
Barbara.
at Connie. Unfortunately, they stopped. They don't have officers in the elementary schools anymore. And I really believe that by the time they get to high school, those that are going to be problems are problems.
Already problems,
And the kids in the elementary school, most of them were receptive. You always had the little wise guy that acted up. But I can say that I know of 3 former students that are now police officers.
Excellent.
We have Barbara. Officer Lipset has a lot.
So it's pretty clear that when you're an SRO, you have an influence over children. They see you, but I think that you go beyond that because, and let me ask you this: in the late '70s and early '80s, because there were so few women as police officers, Did you realize at the time that you probably were influencing the women around you that was seeing you and saying, "Wow, that's a woman in a police role"?
Probably, but back to the schools, we were officers, but we did everything. A perfect example of, I get a call, Officer Grace, come to room such and such. 4th grade, a little girl had a hat on. And I'm like, honey, you can't wear your hat in school. She was a minority. Mm-hmm. She had braids on one side of her head and the other side was out. The braids had been taken apart and the hair was just out. And she was embarrassed. She didn't want the kids to see that. I brought her down to my office and I sent the social worker to Rite Aid to buy a comb, a brush, elastics.
Wow, and you did her hair.
And I did her hair. There was another little girl that was in a foster home, and oh my goodness, that poor child. I asked her, does everybody in that house have hair like Barbie? And she said yes. They didn't know how to comb her hair. They were at a loss. So I told her social worker, don't take her to her class, take her to my office every morning. And we combed hair.
Wow.
And just, the staff used to laugh. How many hats do you wear? I said, oh, I don't know. But you had to do it to make these kids feel like they were something.
We had Officer Lips will probably be able to talk to you about it, but we had a young man and her that she kind of took over, and she actually, her and another teacher and a couple of police officers all chipped in to pay for this kid to go to school. Literally, put him in Catholic school.
Exactly.
And took care of him.
Holy Family, that's why I didn't see you there,
And paid for him to go to Holy Family for a year to get him out of his environment. So, and I had Officers Taylor and Coates, amazing officers at the high school. People don't know the things that these officers did. Christmas came, they buy them things, sneak them things, buy groceries for families. You get to know and interact with not just the student, but with their families as well. And they make an impact. And you don't realize it. Years later, I'm old.
I'm older.
And we go to the grocery store, and I have people, it's like at least once a week come up to you.
Sure.
Do you remember me? Thank you for what you did. Or do you remember me? This happened. And it affects all of us. And I want to say this, Officer Barbara is not here right now, but not only, she was a teacher before she was a police officer. And so she was an excellent teacher, kind of strict, a real tough teacher. You don't want her as a teacher. But she was an amazing teacher. And then she became a police officer and then became an SRO. And when she left being an left the police department, she went back to teaching again.
At Voc?
At Voc, right. And she's made a lot of her students at Voc in the legal and protective field are now police officers.
Yeah, we've got quite a few. Jonathan Miranda is one of them.
And great officers. Great officers. So,
it's police work. People think that so much of it is, the heroic crashing through the doors and locking people up and gunfights and all this stuff, but they don't realize that it's the small moments that build a career.
I used to say, I have all this on, but my biggest weapon is my mouth.
Absolutely.
It's my mouth. It's how you deal with people, how you talk to them, how you interact with people. That saves lives. This here is for protection, but I never had to use this.
I never used my gun.
This is what you have to use. You have to de-escalate, you have to talk to people and relate to them. My philosophy was, no matter, you could have been the person laying out in the gutter right now, all the way to the President of the United States. You're getting the same service, you're getting treated the same. Somebody could have their cat missing, and it's a big catastrophe for them because that's their cat. And it relates to the same thing as somebody having their child missing. That emotion is there at the same time.
I don't think the public, and I don't know how to make them realize that, or can they be made to realize that. But so many things, remember the drunks downtown? Oh my goodness. There were regulars. And I know one unit 11, would pick them up. You had to PC them. You couldn't leave them laying out on the sidewalk. And they always let this particular guy have a last drink before he got in the cell. They'd tell him, it's going to be a long night, take a drink. But
Yeah, no, I used to work at the jail years ago. There were people that come in, they would come in for supper regularly.
and there are kids around here that don't eat. I mean, the school programs are better now, but I can remember doing a drug raid on Brock Avenue, and the house is full of drugs, lots of money, but there's no food for the kids.
No.
Steve Hebert and I go across the street to Cumberland's and buy breakfast food so these kids can eat
Amazing.
when they go to school. And I don't think we need a pat on the back, but people just need to realize that those things happen, that there are kids suffering, even though they have, what do they do on weekends? There's no school lunches, there's no school breakfast.
Well, I know we're ready to wrap up shortly, but I want to say one thing. When we came on, police officers had a lot more respect than they do today, and it troubles me because the police officers today are the same police officers that are going out there and doing the same kinds of things we're doing. But media and everything that's happened puts a bad light on police officers. But I want people to know they're human beings, they're parents, they're mothers and fathers, and they go to work every day putting their life on the line to protect you. Just give them that chance to work with you. They're not there to hurt you, they're there to help you. That's our role.
I don't think in 30 years on the job, I never met an officer that left roll call and set out to say, I'm going to shoot this one or I'm going to hurt somebody. It happens sometimes, and
I just feel bad that today's day, and that's why I think people get discouraged from being a police officer like in our day. But I just really want to put it out there. We need you. We need people with compassion, people who want to come.
And what's your message?
And do the job.
Because obviously, we want to recruit women into this job. So, as a voice of the first generation, what do you think we can do to get more women on the job? What's your message to women out there that might be thinking of taking this job?
Can I tell you? I came on this job. I lived in Bay Village Projects. I got married, and I don't have a problem saying it. I was married at 16. I was married with a child at 16. I was in my senior year of high school. I finished high school that year. I have 2 degrees, college degrees. I worked and I did everything I could. And I took that exam. I got married in 64 and I came on in 78. That changed my life. And it can change anybody's life. It can change your life. That job gave me a beautiful home in the south and the north end that I had for 50-something years. Just gave it up, and I just had a beautiful life, and I was able to raise my children. My son became a police officer, and for the department. So I had a great career, and anybody out there that has compassion, wants a career, it's a wonderful career. It really is.
You miss it.
I really do. I never.
We miss you.
I never went to work one day and said. Sometimes I laugh because you hear somebody say, "Oh, I got 5 years and 4 days and this many hours before I retire," and I go, "I never said that in my whole career. I loved every minute of my job. I loved it."
Excellent.
I think they have to realize that there are dangers. You are going to go home with a headache every now and then, but there's a certain degree of stability in the job. And I mean, I left a nursing career.
Right.
I was a divorcee at the time with a 6-year-old child, and today I'm living comfortably. Somebody asked me when I first retired.
And you both look great. You haven't aged a bit since you left.
Sure.
Yeah, right.
Turn the clock backwards.
What's so funny is after I left, somebody said, "Boy, you look really good." I said, "Boy, I must have been really stressed out. I didn't know it."
But, I was asked, are you doing anything? Did you take another job? No. If I wanted another job, I would have stayed on the department longer.
Right.
Yeah.
Before our batteries die, a quick question. So I've often said that police work. This is the type of job that you'll see something that'll give you nightmares.
Oh yeah.
But you'll do some things that'll make you proud for the rest of your life. So, my question to both of you, I'll start with you, Rita. Best thing you've seen on this job and the worst thing you've seen on this job?
I got to be Mother Teresa's bodyguard. That was probably my best thing, and I treasure that moment. My mother was dying of cancer at the time, and she was fortunate to be blessed by Mother Teresa before she passed away.
Right.
So to me, that's something that stays with me for the rest of my life. The worst is when I worked sex crimes. I had a particular family that was sexually abused. Actually, I had twin twin infants that were sexually abused. And I had to go to Boston Children's Hospital with them and stay with them. I think that's probably the worst day of my career.
Can imagine.
So that's it for me.
Sandy?
I was thinking while you were talking, I guarded Mother Teresa's plane. But I think one of the proudest moments is when I got tapped on the shoulder in the Stop and Shop, and a young man said, "Wow, Officer Grace, you look the same. Do you remember me?" And I remembered the face, but not the name. And a couple of aisles later, I told him, "I may look the same, but I'm slow on thinking. I don't remember your name." And he told me his name, and that made me proud that I had an effect on him, having worked at Kearney for 5 years. The worst moment, I don't know, there were several, but one of the saddest moments I had was the big dance case. And that was my case, and mine and my partner, Ken Gormley. And it was just a very sad situation. That poor girl was thrown around and talked about and everything, and she wasn't a bad person. She had a clean house, she had clean kids. She made the mistake of smoking and needed cigarettes in the middle of the night. That was her biggest fault that day. But
So as as the batteries go too low on our microphones, just let me say thank you so much for coming and talking with us and making this video with us. I had the pleasure of working with both of you when I first came on this job, and you've always been an inspiration to me.
And we're proud of you.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm doing okay.
look at Crash.
I didn't live that down for a long time.
Oh my gosh.
I was hoping somebody else will crash a cruiser pretty soon. Sure enough, they always do. Thank you very much for your service. Thank you for being pioneers in this field. And if we can have more women come in this job because of your influence and what you've said, I'd be very happy. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.